Welcome to Rebel Teacher Alliance, the podcast where teachers rethink student engagement, with Jamie Halsey, Fabian Hoffman, and Scott Kazarian.
Hey everybody, this is Rebel Teacher Alliance. It's really, really weird for me to do the introduction, and I'm sure Scott will laugh at me at how this went. Jamie, I'm sure you can agree. But sadly, Scott could not be here because he's got family obligations and he's got, because of his 27 children, as we all know, he's constantly doing stuff. But today is a great day because I've been waiting for this for a very long time, as some of you probably know. I've been working on integrating building thinking classrooms into my social studies classroom, history and global politics. And I reached out to Peter Liljedahl because I was like, I'll just try. Who knows what happens? And he actually said yes to be on our show. And so today we have Peter Liljedahl on our show. Hello, Peter.
Hi, how are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming. And it was kind of funny trying to organize a date because you're traveling so much. You were in Europe and now you're in Hawaii, and time zones were a huge issue. So I was wondering, just to get us into our conversation, I was wondering what were the travels like? Because you said you were in Europe. Where in Europe did you go, and was this for work or were you for pleasure, and then you landed in Hawaii? And so give us a little bit of an update on your life.
Well, in the last 2 months, I was in Hawaii. I was in Hawaii for almost all of September.
Wow.
And then I was back on the U.S. mainland for about a month, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. I spent 10 days in Japan. From Japan, I went back home for I wasn't quite home for 2 days. I was in Japan. I did some consulting work there and some meetings. Mm-hmm. And then I was back home at a conference in Whistler, just outside Vancouver, which was great because at the time I had 2 kids living there, although one of them has now moved to New Zealand.
Wow.
So after 2 days, we flew to Europe. So we basically went from Japan to Europe with a 2-day layover. And I was I spent 2 weeks working in Denmark, 1 week working in Netherlands, and 2 weeks working in Norway.
Wow.
And then basically used last weekend to transition to Hawaii, where I spent the week working.
So your jet lag at this point is saying, I don't even know what to do anymore with you.
Yes.
I'm just going to go away.
Yes.
Or how does this work?
Yeah, pretty much.
This sounds horrible.
Yeah. The jet lag... Jet lag is sort of a permanent state for me. It's I tend to wake up really early, so I usually get up at I'm usually up at 3 or 4 a.m. to do a bunch of work before I go off and do my work at schools or in districts. So today I got to sleep in and luxuriate until 6:30.
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So you are based out of Vancouver.
That's where my wife likes to say we visit Vancouver.
Okay. And so I was wondering, usually when we have guests on, the first questions that I ask, and we normally have teachers on who are in the classroom specifically. I always want to know when I have conversations with teachers, how did you get into education? Because that's not necessarily a dream job. For some it is, but then the reality hits and you're like, oh, this is what teaching is, right? So I was wondering, how did you get into education?
For me, it was sort of a backward slide. I did a degree at university in major in math, minor in computing science, and I didn't really have ambitions to become a teacher. I was sort of doing this degree on the installment plan. It took me 8 years to do it. I was a high performance athlete at the time, so I kind of chipped away at my degree, and I was living on my own. For most of it, I was living with my now wife, and so I took on I worked as a carpenter the whole time through. I worked in construction for 10
Oh,
years.
wow.
And, but there was two sort of key events, or three key events that sort of led to me becoming a teacher. Maybe I'll say four. The first one was, as a high-performance athlete, I would spend 6 weeks every spring in Florida training. And there was hundreds of athletes training at this same location. And like me, many of them were enrolled in schoolwork at the time. There was high school kids who were, of course, taking a pause from high school but they had to keep up with their studies.
Yeah.
There were university students who were continuing their coursework at a distance, like myself. And I sort of became, especially for the high school kids, sort of a camp tutor. So like between workouts, there'd be usually anywhere from 3 to 8 people in my unit working away at their high school or university courses. And I was working away at mine, and I was helping people out. And I just kind of developed this sort of aptitude for it. At the same time, I had applied to be a teaching assistant for a lab at the university where I now work, but also where I did my undergraduate. For first and second year math courses, they don't have tutorials; they have open labs. So rather than going to your calculus tutorial, you go to the CLAW workshop, calculus and linear algebra workshop, and it was open.
Oh, okay. I had a completely different idea of what claw is, but
And it was open like 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it was staffed by TAs. And I had applied to work in there, and I remember it was one of those walking through the hallway and seeing the advertisement on a bulletin board with the little rip-off pieces of paper with a phone number on it.
Oh, yeah.
oh yeah.
And
Classic.
I had called and made an appointment, and then I showed up, and it was Tasula Berggren who was interviewing me. I still remember her. And the first thing she said to me was, we only hire graduate students to be TAs.
Oh wow.
And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm sorry to waste your time. And she goes, no, let's keep talking. And we kept talking, and she hired me. So I worked as a TA.
Wow.
So that was sort of a second precipitating event. A third one was I was just finishing up my degree, finally after 8 years. And I had a friend who was in some of my courses in that last year. And he said, you should apply for the teacher education program. And I was like, yeah, what the heck? I'll apply for it. It's a good fallback.
What could go wrong?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good fallback plan. It's something I can do until I figure out how I'm going to become whatever I'm going to be, applying my degree in mathematics and computing science. So he kind of just suggested that. I dropped an application in the mail, and I was accepted. And the fourth precipitating event, I think, was, and I wasn't entirely sold on becoming a teacher even then. I was in the teacher education program. It was a 1-year program. I saw it as a fallback plan. There was a practical component to it. And the practical component came at the end of the first term. So for the whole first term, it was a lot of stuff that I thought, okay, well, I'll endure this just as part of my backup plan. And then I get out there for my practicum, and my practicum supervisor was a guy by the name of Doug Super. And he was just amazing.
That's an awesome name.
I know,
Doug
isn't it?
Super. I love it. That's a great name.
Yeah. And
I hope he's a superhero somewhere.
yeah, well, he was amazing. And I remember walking in on the first day of my practicum, and he was like, oh, Peter, you're here. Great, awesome. Why don't you take over this class? Right? Like cold. And,
Wow.
and in that moment, I just absolutely fell in love with teaching. And so it was sort of this backward slide. In fact, I even remember when I applied for the teacher education program, it says, like, why do you want to become a teacher? And I said, I hadn't grown up wanting to become a teacher. I slid into this backwards. It's something that has sort of revealed itself to me rather than being a life's pursuit. And I think, to be honest, that was why I was accepted.
Yeah.
Because
You weren't like super eager, like, oh my God, this is like my dream, right? Because you had like you had options. You were like, I'll do it, but I have other plans.
well, it was this sort of,
So
and I know
there's
how
no
the teacher
pressure.
education program operates now. Like they're looking for people
Yeah.
who have some experience. I had I had
Mm-hmm.
experience teaching, not really, analogous to classroom teaching, but I had experience.
Yeah.
It was something that had revealed itself to me through those experiences,
Yeah.
rather than that sort of naive, shiny penny, glossy-eyed approach to like
Yeah.
education.
I'm
Is
going to
this
change
sort
the
of
world.
Pollyanna, and I want to enter into that, and then being slammed
Yeah.
down by the harsh realities of what a classroom is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel I think I've said this on the show before. Like my teacher, my 12th and 13th grade teacher, I grew up in Germany, so my years were longer. But she also did not start, she was a great English teacher. She did also not start wanting to become a teacher. She had a doctorate. She was like in higher education first, wrote a book and all kinds, and then kind of like landed in her teaching position. And she was amazing. And when she found out that I wanted to become a teacher, which I also never wanted to be, when I started university, I was like, I don't know. I want to be a translator. I want to work in publishing. That was like my area of thinking. She told me, she's like, usually the people that do not like aim, like that's their life goal to become a teacher, are usually the best teachers because they come with a different mindset, which doesn't mean that teachers who want to become a teacher from an early age on aren't great teachers, but that's in her experience. She figured that it's usually because you come with a different mindset into this. You have different experiences, and that's really beneficial to the students and to you, because you don't, like you said, you don't wake up to this harsh reality of like, oh, this is what teaching is.
You kind of come in with your eyes wide open, right? And
Absolutely.
and the teacher education program at my university now requires students to have at least a year of volunteer in a classroom. Like, and not every day, but at least once a week, volunteering in a classroom in the range of where you want to work. Like, if you want to be a primary teacher, you need to volunteer in a primary classroom. And
Yeah.
so we have very low attrition rates because of that.
Yeah.
Like almost
That's
non-existent
amazing.
attrition rates, because the students are coming in with lived experience. They know what this is. It's not some Pollyanna, as I said, that they're entering in.
Yeah. Okay, so now...
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry,
Well, I was
Jamie.
going to say, so you find yourself as a classroom teacher. What was the impetus of the book, Building Thinking Classrooms? Was it
So that was
pretty eye-opening?
yeah. So and when I became a high school teacher, I actually ended up teaching in the same school I did my practicum in, and I didn't just teach math. I taught math, physics, and English composition. So
Oh, wow.
And that's common in Canada, I think, right? Where
it depends on where you are, right? Canada, like the U.S., is decentralized, so it's by state, by province,
got it.
right? And it depends on what your union policy is. So in a lot of places you can't do that, but where I worked, a teacher is a teacher is a teacher. So once you're certified, you are technically certified to teach anything. And
Yeah.
it started out as we need someone to fill this gap, and then me finding my passions, right? And my affinities. I think if I would have not been good at teaching English composition, I would have left that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But I really loved that, and then I did what a lot of teachers do. I did my my master's degree, concurrent to being a classroom teacher.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of work, a lot of weekends, and like spending weekends doing homework and evening courses and so on. But I loved it. And then towards the end of the master's program, I was recruited into a PhD program, for which I took an education leave. And then I, with always the intention of going back into the classroom. Like I wasn't trying to escape the classroom. I loved the classroom. And I say this all the time. I love the classroom, and I use every opportunity to get into classrooms. And in fact,
I mean, you wouldn't be traveling from school to school if you didn't have like that affinity for classrooms, right? You could just do your program from your university and study there and just go like the surrounding schools in your area and like dip in there.
But I've been in the last 2 years, and that's not to say it's only been 2 years, but I've been counting since the last 2 years. I've been in 181 classrooms.
Wow.
In the last 2 years. Some of them more than one.
And you said that all ages, right? Because
K to 12.
You go in primary schools,
So I was teaching, yesterday I was teaching kindergarten, co-teaching kindergarten here in Honolulu. But last week I was teaching calculus in Norway, right? So it's...
That's amazing.
And on Monday, I was teaching language arts and social studies in a middle school. So
I have a question for you about that. So the experience that you have in different countries, right, where the education systems are so different, what are some common threads that you're noticing about education or about students or how people are applying your method, your building thinking classrooms ideas? What are some common things that you're noticing?
Well, I could talk for the whole show just about differences and similarities in education around the world. I will say that there's more commonalities than there are differences, of course. I've never been in a classroom in somewhere in the world and said, I wonder if this is a classroom, right? Like like there's so many similarities. So what I will say is that there are differences in learners. There are differences in teaching systems. There's differences in curriculum. There's differences in the sort of cultural positioning of education in different places in the world. But the minute I start doing building thinking classrooms as a pedagogy, everything becomes the same. The kids behave exactly the same. If I do the same lesson use the same pedagogy in Norway or Qatar or Canada or the US, the kids behave exactly the same.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. I've never experienced such consistency in behavior as when I've started doing building thinking classrooms.
So this gives me like a lot of questions, obviously. Why do you think that is? Is this just from like the research that you have done? You've been to hundreds, probably now at this point, with the research, probably at least 1,000 classrooms, just from like reading your book and the experiences that you've had. Do you think it's just literally the scientific approach where you just get exposure to so many different classrooms and the feedback from students and the feedback from teachers, where you kind of like honed in this technique, where you can kind of see, it's like the scientific method that you're using in order to like pinpoint what it is that works with students?
Yeah,
I think that is the reason.
I think, yes. I think there's two things. One is that the research is sort of mired in this. What works with students? What are things that teachers are able and willing to do, right? So it's like having the research really, really mired in the realities of the classroom, right? Like, I'm sure that there are things out there that I can do that have really big impact on student learning, but teachers are unwilling to do because it's too taxing or too complex or, so it's this sort of constant negotiation in this space of what is feasible, what is achievable. And so I think one reason is that it involved so many different teachers and so many different students and looking for things that worked in multiple settings. And I think that was part of it. The other part of it is, I think that when you engage students, when you engage people, I think they behave very similarly, right? Like, I think it's when they're bored or off task that you get the random chaos, right? But when people are on task, engaged, interested, curious, motivated to do stuff, I think behavior becomes really, really funneled. And I think that's what building thinking classrooms does. It makes students interested, they're engaged, they feel capable, so they feel like they're able to understand it and achieve it. And then and then you get this amazing convergence onto a set of behaviors. And it's a set of behaviors of what students look like when they're working hard on something that they care about and they're engaged in.
One of the things when I was reading the book that I just found interesting, because you really drill down on certain aspects of a lesson. So, for example, you were really looking at ideal group size when kids are working in small groups together, and how you tried it with pairs and you tried it with quads, and you found that 3, for a certain age group, works best. Maybe you could talk about like group size and some of the tenets of building thinking classrooms.
Yeah,
and those lessons.
So drilling down, I think, is a nice way to put it, right? Like one of the big things that came out of this research for me is that everything we do makes a difference, right? Like it's like and there are consequences, both positive and negative, to every decision we make in the classroom. Now, I think we've kind of known that, but the extent to which this makes a difference I think, has been undervalued. So, like, I'll give you some really concrete examples, right? Like, when we're giving students the instructions of what the activity of the day is, if we leave them in their seats versus if we get them on their feet into a huddle standing with us, we see absolutely massive differences in the way they attend to.
Can I say something about that right now? Because I started doing building thinking classrooms, and I was reading it. I hadn't finished it yet, and I made that small change, and it made a huge difference.
Yeah,
it was fascinating. Yeah. It was like exactly what you wrote in the book. It's like if you give the instructions like from the front of the room and you have your slides there and you tell them what they need to do, it takes them so much longer to get started. You have them standing up, you're defronted, you're maybe walking amongst them, you tell them, hey, this is what I want you to do. Boom, they're on their feet already, and they just migrate to their stations and they get going. It is fascinating.
I know.
It really is.
Like, this is it, right? Like, it's everything we do makes a difference, and it makes big differences sometimes. Right? And the number of teachers who say to me, like, I read this in the book, I thought, it's not going to make a difference. I did it, and it's like, holy cow, I can't believe what a difference it made, right?
Yeah.
And so coming back to Jamie's question, so group size, not just group size, but how we group the kids, right? Like, I think that pretty much every single listener to this podcast uses collaborative groups to some extent, right?
Yeah.
And
for sure,
by and large, we tend to use, as teachers, one of two grouping strategies. One is called strategic grouping, where I'm going to make the group based on what my goals are, right? So maybe I want to differentiate, so I'm going to make ability groups. Maybe I want to increase productivity, I'll make mixed ability groups. Maybe I want peace and quiet, I'm going to keep certain students apart. Maybe I want a combination of these things, but I'm going to work really hard to make the groups, because I believe that how I form the groups is going to shape the experience for the students and the experience for me, right? Yeah. So that's called strategic grouping, dominant grouping strategy we see in elementary school. Then there is the work with who you want, the self-selected groupings, the teachers saying get yourselves into groups, which is a dominant grouping strategy we see at high school, right? Middle school is sort of a transition between these, and often a combination of them. Well, it turns out that both of those are highly ineffective for getting students to think. And ironically, for the same reason. And it's that students already know what their role will be.
Yeah.
Whether they're in a strategic group or a random group or a self-selected group, they know what their role is, because there's social hierarchies at play in the self-selected groups. And in the strategic groups, we interviewed kids, hundreds of kids. After grade 2, every single one of them could tell us why they were in the group the teacher put them in. And whether they got it right or wrong is irrelevant. If you go into a group believing that I'm in this group because I need to be helped by the smarter one, I'm going to behave a certain way, right?
Or I'm the quiet one, or I'm the, like, whatever role they think was imposed on them.
Yeah. So how do we disrupt this? How do we disrupt this knowledge of what their expected role is? Random, right? So we started doing random groups, and we saw an absolutely massive shift in this. The survey question we asked, it was a single question. If you knew you were going to work in groups today to complete an activity or a task, what is the likelihood that you would share an idea? That was it. The pre-data, where we surveyed students who were in self-selected groups or strategic groups, 80% of students said that they were unlikely or highly unlikely to share an idea. 80%, right?
Wow.
That's crazy.
The post-data, 3 weeks after doing random groups, 100% said that they were likely or highly likely to offer an idea.
And that's really counterintuitive, right? Like what we were taught, and like even maybe our own biases as students ourselves. Like, it's pretty eye-opening.
Yeah. And now that's not to say that they thought that they were going to be great ideas. 50% of them said probably won't lead to a solution, but I'm going to offer an idea. Because they're going into this space now predisposed to not having a role assigned to them, right? Like they're thinking, I'm going to contribute because I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing in this group. Right?
Yeah.
But the research went further because it wasn't just that it had to be random. It had to be visibly random. Because when we did random, the kids didn't believe it was random. But the minute that they saw that it was random, they behaved differently. And it had to be frequent, about once every 45 to 60 minutes, right? And so once every lesson. Because what happens is over that the random groups, the roles are negotiated and dynamic, and they're constantly shifting. But towards the end of the lesson, they sort of stabilize. And now you're the leader and I'm the follower. And now if we put them back into those same groups the next day, they fall into those roles again. So re-randomize, right? So like all of these little things make big differences. Now let's get to group size, right? So we found almost immediately that groups of 3 were optimal. And if you can't do groups of 3, do groups of 2. Groups of 4 were always a dumpster fire. And there was a couple of things that we drilled into that, right? Like looking at voices. So when we had groups of 3, we always heard 3 voices. And when we had groups of 4, we heard 3 voices, by and large, right? There was always someone who was sort of on the outside. When we had groups of 5, we heard 2 voices. There was sort of a dominant pair that would emerge. And it was sort of like groups of 3 was sort of the optimal. Now, it turned out groups of 3 were optimal in pretty much every setting, including primary. But in primary, we had to start with groups of 2. Not because groups of 3 weren't better, but because until the students can learn to collaborate, groups of 3 are not going to be effective. And very young children come in, they don't naturally collaborate, right? They're coming in still playing in parallel. You've got to work on this and go through the phases until they can collaborate. And then we can move to groups of 3. And the same was true also with really vulnerable populations. When we worked with sort of alternate ed or adult upgrading, in these situations, we found we had to start with groups of 2, not because they didn't know how to collaborate, but because they'd often experienced some significant trauma in education. And and it had sort of violated and compromised some of their trust around educational settings, and to build that trust back.
Yeah. And especially like in education, I think trust is so important, right? If your students don't trust you, they're not going to work for you. They're not going to do the work. I mean, there are some that are intrinsically motivated because they just want to know more.
Yeah.
But if you ask them stuff that they're not used to, they're like introducing VNPSs, gamification, whatever. If they don't like you, they don't trust you, they don't believe that what you're doing is the best for them, they're going to be like, nope, sorry.
Yeah.
So trust is huge.
And it actually appeared in the research as well. So one of the things that we learned was we cannot use tasks that are unsolvable, right? Like we can't use these sort of tricky things where it's like, well, yes, it's unsolvable, but you should be able to tell me it's unsolvable. Like those things really violated the trust that we were building up with the students.
Yeah. So I want to kind of shift focus a little bit now to the classroom approach. So your book was written with mathematics in mind, right? So that was like the research that you have done. And so I've been trying to apply this now to my social studies classroom. And it's a little tricky. ChatGPT helps a lot, I gotta say, because it helps me a lot to be like, okay, so these are the principles of building thinking classrooms. So now how do I apply this in my classroom? And what can you tell people who want to apply this to other like subjects, humanities, languages, whatever? What is like a good strategy that you would recommend?
So there's a couple of things, right? So first of all, the research was mostly in math. That was my focus. That was my passion. But 50% of my participants were generalist teachers. So if you're a generalist teacher, like Jamie, if you teach every subject, you find something that works well in language arts, you're using it in social studies and math and science, right?
Yeah.
So that's what these teachers were doing as well. So right from the beginning, I was learning how this worked in other subjects. And in fact, when it was time to write the book, my editor and I actually spent time talking about, should this book be written just for math or should it be written as cross-curricular?
Okay.
We chose to write it for math because it was already a following in mathematics, and by writing the book for mathematics, we were feeding into a demographic that was hungry for it. But I could have written it cross-curricular back then, and I'm glad I didn't, because my work on this has sort of evolved, and if I was to write that book now, and I will eventually write that book, I think that book will be better for the cross-curricular one than it would have been 5 years ago. The key is there are things that change and things that don't, right? Random groups looks the same in social studies as it does in so getting the kids at the whiteboard works the same. Changes, the big change is what constitutes a thinking task in mathematics versus a thinking task in social studies, right? So you got to look closely at what are thinking activities in social studies. Now, let's sort of peel back the layers on this. First of all, your resource already has great thinking tasks in it. I can promise you that. But it also has a lot of non-thinking tasks. So like if you read a chapter, at the end of the chapter, there's a bunch of questions. The first chunk of those questions are what I call "Where's Waldo" questions. So these are the questions that ask the students they're really questions to check that they read the chapter.
Yeah, and you can go dive back into the text and you can find the answer, and it's just
And the reason I call them "Where's Waldo" questions is because what the kids often do is they don't read the text, they read the question, and then they go looking for the answer.
And then
right? And those are not thinking tasks. We could argue that they are reading comprehension tasks, right? And depending on what grade you're teaching, those are important questions, right? What did you interpret this text to mean? But if you're teaching high school social studies, we're trying to get past that, right? We're trying to get to deeper meaning. We're trying to get to the tensions that exist in social studies. Social studies, by and large, is what I refer to as an analytic subject, right? You're going to encounter situations in social studies that are going to create tensions, and now you're going to have to analyze and come to some conclusions about that, right? And so what constitutes a thinking task? Well, after the "Where's Waldo" task, now we're getting into these interesting tasks, these tasks that signal to you, like, or to ask you about the tensions that existed within the text or the phenomena. Tasks that ask you about inference. How can what you learned here explain what's happening here? And those are the thinking tasks. And the minute you have one of those tasks, getting the kids at the whiteboards in the random groups becomes an amazing task. right? So the
Yeah.
activity we were doing actually on Monday, this teacher was deep into a unit on inventions of the Industrial Revolution, right? So, and the impact that they had on society. So, and because he was already deep into this unit and was into project work and so on, I suggested, well, let's create an analogous activity, an activity that you might be able to think about in terms of how to launch this unit next year, right? So it gives you an idea on where to start. So what the activity became was it was the analogy was the most significant inventions of the 20th century. So we started out, we had these slips of paper, we gave them 2 slips of paper. And the task was you have to sequence these in order of significance. And
Yeah.
but it's not significance to you now. It's significance to society at the time of the invention, the impact it had on society when it happened.
Yeah. So perspective taking,
Yeah.
first thing they need to do, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were not allowed to use any technology or any readings. We just gave them these 2 slips of paper. The first 2 inventions were the radio and the internet. And so now they got into these, they were in these groups and they were debating, trying to figure out which one was most significant. Then they got another one. And then they had to put that into the hierarchy, and then another one, and another one, and another one. And they only got the next slip of paper when they were ready, when they had their hierarchy set, and then they would have to squeeze that one in between 2 things, and until they had done 10 of them. And we had things on there like the automobile and rockets and submarines and the personal computer and television, right? So it was all of these items, things that they are familiar with, but they hadn't really juxtaposed. After they had done that, we came around and when a group was done, we would give them an article. And it was an article about these 10 items. And it was not a long article. It was maybe 1,500 words. And it had a little paragraph about each of these inventions in an unranked order. But it was information about them and why these things, what the impact they had on society. Antibiotics was another one. So what we would do is we would hand them the article, and I would say, I want you to read about these 3 things. And I would pick 3 things from near the bottom of their list. And I would just take my marker and just put dots in them. I said, read about these 3 things. And after you've read them, consider if you want to reorder your hierarchy or not. So they would read, and then every single group did a reordering. Right now, they knew a little bit more about these things, so they put them in different places. And then, after they had done that, I came around. I would put dots next to the top 2 items on their list, and I would say, your claim is that these are the most significant. So that's your claim. You need to now write a reason why that's your claim. And then you have to justify it with evidence from the text.
Yeah.
And so they did that. And they were doing all this at the whiteboards. And the photographs we have on this are just unbelievable. Like the kids writing and talking and debating and talking to the group next to them because they had different things at the top and so on. It was such a rich activity. And it was just a way, it was an analog that social studies grade 8 doesn't have this topic, but it was, or grade 9, I can't remember what grade it was now. But as an analog to how can we introduce, the significant changes of the Industrial Revolution next year?
Yeah. So did they go on to then, because you've essentially outlined a CER paragraph, right? Did they go at the end? Did they write a paragraph about it, or
No.
was this all just done like in discussion?
This was all in discussion at the
What
board.
was the end result?
We could have moved to writing a paragraph, right?
Yeah.
That could have been the next lesson's activity, because you know this takes time, and paragraph writing is not something you just knock off in the last 5 minutes of a lesson. What we actually did was we sat them down, and we had them now do individually. We gave them a list of new inventions from the 20th and 21st century that they had to rank order. Then they had to their claim for the top two, they had to justify with two different reasons.
Yeah.
And we could have shifted that then into not justify, they had to reason twice. And we could have shifted to a justification where they now had to take out their computers and do research on things. But it was, just to showcase what can be done here. And it sort of fits a method that I have developed that works really, really well in all of these courses. And it's a method that I call We Think We Know, which is we start with a we think activity. And then we shift it to a we know activity by giving them access to some external information and some explicit requirement to do things like justify.
Because I think, so what I noticed was that the biggest struggle students have when I'm doing this, I've used it a few times by just handing them primary sources. And they had to read the primary source, and they had to discuss what's being said in the primary source, who are the people involved, etc., like whatever I needed them to do. So then what I did was, would you recommend then, after you have the primary source, to give them an article so that they can check whether what they were thinking was correct? Is that kind of like what the idea was behind this?
So it depends. Like, I think it depends on where you are on that subjective objective continuum, right? Like, is this something like the most significant inventions of the 20th century? Like, that's subjective. Like, there cannot be a definitive answer. But, a fact from history has a definitive answer. It has a definitive date and place and so on and so forth. It has a sequence that is definitive. It is objective. Yeah. So if you're engaging in an activity like a timeline, giving them access to some sources that actually allow them to correct their timeline, it makes a lot of sense. But giving them so what I found was really useful was this article, because it was a subjective activity. Here's an article with more information about the impact. Yeah. But it wasn't, here's an article with this expert's opinion on what the order of significance is. Now, one of the things that is, you're talking about, original articles, original text, is we found tension is a really great way to get students thinking in social studies. So when we give them, we don't just give them original text. What we do is we give them access to 3 texts. So maybe something from the time, a newspaper article from the time, an original source, right? A page from a 1970s textbook, and a YouTube video that's from a contemporary perspective on the same event. And what these do is they create a tension, because they all are looking at the same event, but they're looking at it from very different perspectives. And now we've created this disquiet, right? This is disequilibrization. And now the kids now you can start asking really good questions, right? From a perspective taking situation. Like, why would the journalist have written the article the way they did? And what do you think actually happened? And why was the 1970s textbook positioning it this way? And like, you can start asking so many great thinking tasks, because we've created that tension, right? Anytime you create tension, thinking is needed to resolve it.
Right,
Yeah.
like if you're looking at whose voices are present and whose voices are not heard, and why that is, and what was going on at the time, or how people's opinions of it have evolved. Yeah, that's really rich discussion.
Yeah.
One activity I did was we were talking about the lead up to the Revolutionary War, and I gave them 3 sources that kind of like showed different perspectives of how people reacted to Lexington Concord, where the first shots were fired for the revolution. I gave them first like the message that Congress sent to the colonists and the colonists' reaction. Like how did they see those messages? That was the first step. So you have a very broad political view. Then I had 2 soldiers who were talking with 2 generals who were talking about what happened in Concord, Lexington. So both sides. And then the last one that I gave them was, okay, now we have 2 people that were specifically there as civilians who wrote like journal entries. Like how can you see like what are common things? How did people react? And it was really fascinating because they were like, at first they were like, yeah, this is like boring text, and then it gets like incredibly more interesting the deeper down and the closer you get to the actual people involved. And so again, that's like what you're saying is like these 3 levels.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very similar approach that I stumbled into then.
So like when you read chapter 9 of my book, which is all about creating flow, and there's this staircase analogy, that's a very good analogy for deductive tasks, where we work with something where I give you a little bit of knowledge and then you're going to grow more knowledge through deductive reasoning. But when we're in these analytic tasks, it's the better metaphor is peeling an onion or digging deeper, right? Like that's a better analogy, because what we're doing, like you don't want to hit them with the first question being something about, try to justify the perspective that so and so had. Maybe the first thing is what's common in the 3 texts, right? Like peeling back that layer, and now we're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper. What we found, you said something interesting there. You said it starts off with them feeling like this is boring. So one of the things that we found that really helps heighten curiosity is using this "we think we know" approach. So like even before you give them the 3 original texts, you start posing questions to which they have to answer just based on their own opinion. And then that heightens their curiosity. And then when you release them to the original sources, they now are interested in it. Rather than, and like so often education is a solution looking for a problem, rather than rather than just coming in and saying you should be interested in this, finding a way to heighten their curiosity before releasing them to
and you would do this
text.
You would do this like as you are explaining it to them in like the first 5 minutes, you huddle them around you and you say, okay, so what do you think about so-and-so topic?
What we found that
or how would that work?
They have to make commitment. So they have to actually be at the whiteboards writing answers to questions just based on their opinion. That level of commitment is what heightens the curiosity. And if you think about the task that I shared with you about the inventions of the 20th century, they were using their own opinion, and then came the information.
Well, and I think that's a safer approach, right? Because they're just expressing their opinion. There's no right or wrong answer. And especially if you build a classroom that is really based in relationships and valuing others' opinions, and that might take a while to solidify that. But opening it up, and it's almost not a low cognitive task, but it's a
low state,
a friendlier task, low risk.
It's a low risk.
Yeah. That's brilliant.
And that's what we actually write on the board. We think we know, right? So it's like under the "we think," it's a very safe space for them to write things.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of students that I have encountered this year when I started this are telling me, well, I don't know. And which is really funny when you ask them to think. It's like I always tell them, I don't care what you know. I want you to guess.
What do you
like
think?
throw something on there.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like knowledge.
Because
knowledge is a byproduct, right? That's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and I think too, like kids are conditioned to, there's right answers and wrong answers. And especially for those kids that are really good at the game of school, they're mostly interested in what's the right answer and can you tell me the right answer so then I can memorize that, put it, regurgitate it back to the teacher. And so you're forcing kids to be kind of uncomfortable, which is really how they grow. They have to be uncomfortable in order to stretch. So
yeah, that's what I noticed in one of my classes is like they're very good about, like especially in high school, they know how to play the game.
Oh yeah,
they know what. I have conversations with students because I'm not super strict about deadlines. For example, I'm like, hey, as long as you turn it in, you do the work, I'm fine.
Yeah.
And so she very very frankly said like, well, it's so late because I was prioritizing. I knew that you are pretty nice about it, so yours was at the bottom of my list. And I'm like, yeah, you're smart. You know exactly how to play this game.
That student could be an economist, right? Like
yeah,
from
exactly.
an economic perspective, that is a really good strategy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So where is the research taking you now? What are you exploring now?
I'm exploring. I'm not researching right now. I'm exploring. So, because I get so many opportunities to be in classrooms, some of the things I am exploring are exactly these things around how do we heighten curiosity. I'm also exploring a lot on how I can increase empathy in the classroom. Like, I'm of the opinion that the random groups is the most powerful practice in the book. Because it builds community builds culture, and it builds empathy. And when you end up with empathetic participants, collaboration looks completely different, right?
Yeah.
But empathy is, if you treat empathy as something that emerges naturally in education, you only get so far. So what are some things that we can do to boost getting empathy to get going in the classroom, especially the early days when we're building a thinking classroom? So, we have found things like having the kids write their names on the board, their first name on the board is a booster for empathy, but they're not allowed to write their own name. They have to turn to a partner and say, what's your name? How do I spell? And doing these little this or that's. So after you've we give them a this or that every lesson. So after you've asked them their name and how to spell it, you have to ask them the this or that. So do you prefer waffles or pancakes? And then you record what they prefer. And these are empathy boosters we're finding because it's helping them to get to know each other on a level other than how they think about the task.
Yeah. That's really good. I'm going to put that into my approach very soon.
I actually do that quite often. There's we also have an Edu Protocols podcast that we do. We dig into different protocols. And one of them is, it's so silly, it's things that rock. And you put up a this or that, basically. But where they place themselves is like on a continuum. Like, how much do you like this thing versus that thing?
Yeah.
And then they place themselves in a line. And the conversations are great.
Yeah.
And then they find those commonalities.
Yeah. And then that starts to build empathy as you get to know each other in different ways.
Yeah. And builds culture.
Yeah.
All right. So, I mean, I could talk to you like forever because this is so fascinating to me. Especially, I take some of the nuggets that you have from the book and I throw it to the students and I say, hey, this is like research stuff that we're doing here. And they always are like fascinated that like with the grouping thing, they always sit there and they're like, oh yeah. So it's really funny. So I could talk to you forever, but we do have to come to an end because you have things to do.
Yes.
So our last question for our interviewees is always, what have you been playing lately? So what is a game that you like to play or a game that you recommend for teachers or maybe yourself, or it doesn't even have to be applicable in the classroom?
So I spend a lot of time on the road, 330 days a year. My wife travels everywhere with me.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Games have to be portable. So we play cards.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of different games we play. One is, it's a Swedish game. It's called Ventia. And it's kind of like a cross between Crazy Eights and some other things. It has a ton of elements of strategy to it, but it also has these elements of randomness, like all card games. But randomness in that as you're getting close to the end of the game, you have to start playing certain cards completely blind. And it just sort of really equalizes the playing field. But our favorite game to play is Monopoly Deal. And for Monopoly Deal, I cannot recommend this enough, right? So think about all the best parts of Monopoly, because that's what it's got, and none of the worst, right? So it's every game takes about 10 minutes.
So no waiting.
Nope.
And
like in Monopoly, Monopoly takes 4 hours. You're 20 minutes into it, you already know who's going to win, and then it's just a slow, painful death.
It's a painful death,
Yeah.
But Monopoly Deal, every game takes 10 minutes and ish, and it has a lot of the same premises, and but it just goes quick. There's a ton of strategy to it, and
is that an app style game, or is it a card game also?
It's a card game.
It's a card game. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it's $5 at Target. Here we go.
Yeah.
All right.
It is such a good game.
That's amazing. I love those games that are cheap, small, and you can play them so many times because they're so entertaining.
Yeah.
So that's a really good tip.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for being on our show. It was amazing talking to you. Hopefully we can have you back on when maybe you've released your next book or just in general to check in. We love to bring people back on.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for everything you do in education. I think it's super important work, and hope we see you soon.
Yeah,
thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.